Ukraine crisis, the power of language. In the interview, the novelist Andrey Kurkov.
We are at the International Literature Festival in Berlin, where you are one of the participants. Andrey Kurkov, you are a Ukrainian writer from Kiev. You speak, or at least you understand, 11 languages. Welcome to the interview on DW.
I speak 6. The others are gone because I didn't use them.
I suggest we continue in Russian.
Fine, it's my mother tongue.
Andrey Kurkov, there are more translations of works by you than by any other Ukrainian writer. Your latest work is Ukraine Diaries, Dispatches from Kiev. It's about the Maidan Revolution, but it has not yet appeared in Ukrainian or Russian. Is it just for export?
It was written instead of another book that I had started in October. It was going to be a collection of essays for foreign readers about Ukraine, the way it was, and the way it is today, about the differences between Russian and Ukrainian history, and about the differences between the mentalities and politics of the two countries. But then, after the protests began on November the 21st, I realized I couldn't write a relaxed book in these tense times. So I called my publishers in Austria and offered them Ukraine Diaries instead. Entries from November the 21st to April the 24th, the events of each day, without regard to what would happen the following day.
Ukraine Diaries is something of an exception in your works. It's about current events of interest to readers in the West right now. Your other works, including bestsellers such as Death and the Penguin, are intended more for Ukrainian readers. How do you explain your popularity in the West and in Germany?
It's probably because the stories I tell are gripping and in some way universal. Foreign readers can empathize with my Ukrainian protagonists. Perhaps the mix of black humor and absurdist irony in all my books also has some appeal.
You were born in Leningrad in Russia and moved to Kiev, where you still live. You write in Russian. So are you a Russian writer or a Ukrainian writer?
I'm a Ukrainian writer of Russian origin who writes in the language of his heritage. The argument about what I really am has been going on for 20 years. I fight for the rights of Ukrainian authors who write in Russian, who identify with Ukraine and Ukrainian literature. Not all Ukrainian intellectuals think like me, so the argument will continue.
That means some people think it's not politically correct to write in Russian in Ukraine.
Russian is the first and greatest victim of the political situation and the conflict with Russia. Nonetheless, I write mainly in Russian. Just a few essays are in Ukrainian and English. Russian is spoken more quietly now because for the very many Russian speakers in Ukraine, 12 million ethnic Russians and probably 10 to 12 million Ukrainians, their mother tongue has become the language of the aggressor. That's why they now speak more softly. As do I.
But all your books have been translated into Ukrainian?
No, not at all. All the new ones are published simultaneously in Russian and Ukrainian, though my children's books are only in Ukrainian. None of my books have been published in Russia since 2008. I don't exist there, and in Ukraine, readers prefer children's books in Ukrainian.
You described Russian as the language of the aggressor. So what does that mean for the future? As you said, it's the mother tongue of 12 million Ukrainians.
These 12 million feel Ukrainian. Ukrainian citizens who do not need Putin to protect them because they speak Russian. They don't face any bans and don't have any problem speaking Russian. There never was any such problem. Politicians invented the language problem to divide the electorate. Instead of discussing ways to develop develop the country, one faction said it wanted Russian declared an official language, while the other faction promised to prevent Russian ever becoming an official language.
But one of the first things the new government tried to do was impose restrictions on Russian. Many observers considered that misguided.
It was not an attempt to restrict the use of Russian. And it wasn't the government. It was a member of Yushchenko's party called Svyatoslav Kirilenko. During a session of parliament, he called for the repeal of a law that Yanukovych had pushed through in 2012 that gave the languages of minorities official status as regional languages. In reality, the repeal of the law would have changed nothing, and President Poroshenko never signed the repeal, so it's not on the books. Though this law never used to play any role, it's now become important. De facto, they use Russian as the official language in eastern Ukraine, both in official communication, in the courts, and in other areas as well. There was very little Ukrainian spoken there. The law simply gave Russian an official status in the east of the country.
But how do you explain the fact that the works of Gogol, for example, a great Ukrainian writer who wrote in Russian, are taught as foreign literature in schools?
After the transition of power in 1991, or rather after the country changed its name without a transition of power, the government decided on a special gesture. It created jobs for Ukrainian nationalists in the areas of information, culture and education, but not the economy. At the same time, Russian-speaking culture in Ukraine has never been investigated. For example, is Bulgakov a Ukrainian or a Russian writer? It's a question of identity. Gogol's identity as a writer was Russian, though he enriched literary High Russian with thousands of Ukrainian words. You could say he introduced Ukrainian into Russian, but I think the relationship to Russian-speaking writers in Ukraine will change.
How?
It will become more civilized. I think we'll develop a more inclusive and less exclusive culture. There's still a powerful group of intellectuals who think that Ukrainian culture means ethnic Ukrainian culture. But there's an even more powerful group that believes we are a multinational state, and whatever is created here, whether by Hungarians, Greeks, Bulgarians, ethnic Russians or Jews, it's all part of Ukrainian culture. This contest, this argument will continue, but in the end, the more civilized, inclusive position will prevail.
You are a professional author. You earn your money writing books. What role does literature play for you in these unsettled times? And what role does analysis, the observation of trends in society?
Since November, I've hardly touched literature. I've been busy with essays and my diary. I've written almost 100 articles about the situation in Donbass, Crimea and Kiev. I write about politics and am more of a social activist than a writer at the moment.
So, as an engineer of the human soul, or as an engineer of a civil society, how do you evaluate current trends in Ukrainian society? Are we seeing the birth of a nation? The transformation of a nation? Or its collapse?
We're seeing the recovery after a collapse caused by politicians. 10 years ago, it was correct to say that one part of Ukraine was pro-Russian and another pro-Ukrainian. But now, thanks to Yanukovych and Putin, the country has come together. All the regions apart from Donbass and Crimea have become pro-European. They've all come to appreciate the importance of a united country. At the same time, we're also seeing a transformation. A tolerant and peaceful society has been radicalized. I think we'll see a permanent state of war and conflict in the east.
I don't wish to repeat Russian propaganda about what it calls a fascist junta. But what about the disturbing tendencies in Western Ukraine, such as the Nationalist Right Sector Party?
If a junta were in power in Kiev, it would have simply bombed Donbass to smithereens. Generals would be in power. Tanks and missiles would line the border. There would either be outright war with Russia or a fragile peace. But there is no junta. Ukrainian politicians have always been and still are weak-willed. Though Poroshenko is a decisive politician who understands that he's responsible for the very survival of the country. Ukraine is moving from an ambivalent political balancing act between East and West to a more decisive form of government. And that will probably lead to a crackdown on corruption. At least I very much hope so. At the same time, I think it's very important for Ukrainians to remain tolerant towards people with different backgrounds. I've been arguing with the nationalists for more than 2 decades. We respect each other, we accept our differences, and we don't hurl abuse at each other. I hope all other Ukrainians who disagree about things will use their tongues and not their muscles.
On Tuesday, an association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union was ratified. But a central element, a full customs union, will be implemented later. What do you think about that?
I see that as a victory for Russia. I was a bit surprised that it's a victory seized from Europe and not Ukraine. This probably weakens Poroshenko. On the other hand, it all depends on what further steps Ukraine and Europe take. Some European parliamentarians are saying that the decision to postpone the customs union is not final and could be soon changed or amended.
Andrey Kurkov, many thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.